Most people remember Frank Sinatra with a microphone in his hand, tuxedo sharp as a razor, singing My Way with a glass of Jack Daniels tilted just right. But the last time I saw Frank, really saw him, there was no microphone, just a 5-pound sledgehammer, and rage so pure it could crack the moon. It was March 24th, 1962, Palm Springs, the kind of desert heat where even at night you could smell the asphalt melting. But that night there was something else in the air, something bitter, the smell of betrayal. Frank Sinatra was supposed to be the most powerful man in America, or at least that's what we all believed. That night, as he stood there demolishing millions of dollars of perfect concrete we'd poured with our own hands for just one guest, he wasn't just destroying a helipad, he was shattering his heart, his pride, and everything he thought the American dream promised. My name's Eddie. I watered his gardens, I poured his concrete, and I swear on my mother's grave, what I saw in Frank Sinatra's eyes that night wasn't anger. It was pure, unadulterated pain. Let me take you back when the sun still shone bright on Frank's world, late 1961. Frank had ordered us to transform his Palm Springs estate, we called it Paradise, into a fortress. But not just any fortress. This place was going to be the Western White House. Why? Because the president was coming. John F. Kennedy. You should have seen Frank's excitement, 46 years old, standing at the absolute peak of the world, yet giddy as a kid on Christmas morning. When he gave us instructions, his hands actually trembled. "Eddie," he said to me, voice tight with emotion, "this concrete's got to be perfect, smooth as glass. When the president's helicopter touches down, I don't want him to feel a single bump." It wasn't just about the helipad. We installed secure rooms for Secret Service agents, extra telephone lines with direct connections to the Pentagon, new quarters for the president's personal staff. Frank had done everything to get Kennedy elected. He'd rallied Hollywood, he'd organized fundraising galas that pulled in millions, and according to whispers in dark corners, he'd even called in favors from some very dangerous friends. But we didn't talk about that part. We just poured the concrete. Frank saw this visit as his coronation. He wasn't just a singer anymore. He was the president's closest confidant. He had a seat at the table, a legitimate seat. I remember one afternoon watching him inspect the helipad. The sun was setting, painting the desert gold and crimson. Frank stood there in his white linen shirt, sleeves rolled up, hands on his hips, surveying his kingdom. He turned to me and smiled, that crooked Sinatra smile, and said, "Eddie, this is it. This is when everything we've worked for pays off." He believed it. God help him, he really believed it. We all did. The guest cottages were repainted. The palm trees were trimmed to military precision. Frank even had us install a flagpole taller than any building in Palm Springs, just so the American flag could fly higher when the president arrived. Every detail mattered, every blade of grass, every light bulb. At night, after the crews had gone home, I'd sometimes find Frank out there alone, walking the perimeter of that helipad, running his hand along the edge of the concrete like it was something holy. He'd stare up at the stars, and I could see his lips moving. I never asked what he was saying, but I think he was praying, thanking God, or maybe thanking Kennedy. Same thing, in his mind. But while we were building dreams in the California sun, storm clouds were gathering in Washington. Dark, bureaucratic storm clouds that Frank didn't see coming. Or maybe he saw them but chose to look away, because sometimes when you're standing in the light, you forget that shadows exist. The man casting those shadows was J. Edgar Hoover, director of the FBI, a man who'd been collecting secrets on powerful men since before most of us were born, and Hoover despised Frank Sinatra with a cold, institutional hatred. Hoover had a file, a thick one, and inside that file was a name that would change everything: Judith Campbell. Here's where it gets complicated, messy, dangerous. Frank had introduced this woman, Judith Campbell Exner, beautiful, sophisticated, connected to President Kennedy. They'd become involved, romantically involved. That alone would have been a scandal, given Kennedy was married to Jackie. But that wasn't the real problem. The real problem was that Judith Campbell was also sleeping with someone else, someone far more dangerous than a president. Sam Giancana, Chicago mob boss, one of the most feared men in America. Let that sink in for a moment. The President of the United States and a mafia kingpin were sharing the same woman, and the architect of this toxic triangle, Frank Sinatra. Hoover had proof, photographs, phone records, hotel receipts, witness testimonies. He'd been building this case like a prosecutor preparing for trial. And in March 1962, just days before the president was scheduled to land in Palm Springs, Hoover made his move. He walked into the Oval Office and placed that file on Kennedy's desk. "Mr. President," Hoover said, and you could hear the venom in his voice even secondhand, "if you stay at Sinatra's house, this file goes public." Kennedy went pale. Hoover had him cornered. The President of the United States, trapped by his own appetites and his poor choice of friends. But it wasn't just Hoover applying pressure. Kennedy's brother Bobby, the Attorney General, had been waging his own war against organized crime, and Frank's connections to the mob made Bobby's skin crawl. Bobby saw Frank as a cancer, a liability, someone who needed to be cut out before he infected the entire administration. Bobby told his brother something simple and brutal: "Drop Frank, drop him like a hot stone, or this whole thing burns." Kennedy had a choice to make. Loyalty to his friend, the man who'd campaigned for him, raised millions, delivered California, or self-preservation. It wasn't even close. The president chose himself. But he didn't have the courage to tell Frank directly. He couldn't face him, so he delegated the dirty work to someone else. Someone who owed everything to the Kennedy family: Peter Lawford, actor, Rat Pack member, and most importantly, President Kennedy's brother-in-law through marriage to Patricia Kennedy. Peter was given the assignment: call Frank, tell him the president won't be coming, make it sound like a security issue, don't mention the file, don't mention Giancana, just make it go away. Back in Palm Springs, we were putting the final touches on paradise. The flowers had been planted, bright California poppies and desert marigolds. The helipad had been painted, the white circle gleaming in the sun like a target. Frank stood in the garden, cocktail in hand, surveying his creation with the pride of a man who'd built something eternal. Then the phone rang. It was late afternoon, golden hour, the kind of light photographers kill for. Frank was laughing about something, I can't remember what, when his assistant called him inside. "Mr. Sinatra, Mr. Lawford on the line." Frank's face lit up. Peter calling probably meant final confirmation, arrival time, security details. Frank walked inside, still smiling. I was outside, coiling a garden hose, when I heard his voice through the open window. At first it was warm. "Peter, tell me you got good news, pal." Then silence, long, terrible silence. I stopped what I was doing. Something in that silence felt wrong, like the air before an earthquake. When Frank spoke again, his voice had changed. It was tight, strained. "What do you mean, security concerns? Peter, we built everything they asked for. We have Secret Service approved rooms. We have." Another silence, longer this time. Then I heard it, the sound of Frank's voice cracking, not with anger, with disbelief, with something breaking inside him. "Bing Crosby. He's staying with Bing fucking Crosby." I'll never forget the way he said that name, like it was poison. Bing Crosby, Frank's professional rival for decades, a crooner from the old guard, a man who represented everything Frank had fought to surpass, and worst of all, a registered Republican, a man who'd never lifted a finger to help Kennedy get elected. The president was choosing Bing Crosby's house over Frank Sinatra's, for security reasons. It was a lie. We all knew it, and Frank knew it most of all. Peter tried to soften the blow, tried to explain, but every word he spoke just drove the knife deeper. Frank stood there, phone pressed to his ear, his face cycling through emotions like a slot machine. Confusion, shock, hurt, fury. Finally he spoke. His voice was ice. "You tell Jack Kennedy something for me, Peter. You tell him Frank Sinatra says, 'Go to hell.'" He slammed the phone down so hard the receiver cracked. For a moment he just stood there, perfectly still, staring at nothing. Then his hands started shaking, his jaw clenched, and I saw something I'd never seen before in all my years working for him. Tears. Frank Sinatra was crying, not sobbing, not weeping, just silent tears running down his face while his fists clenched and unclenched at his sides. Then, just like that, the tears stopped, and something else took their place, something cold and final. He walked past me without a word, went into the equipment shed, and came back out holding a sledgehammer. The sledgehammer was a big one, industrial grade, the kind we used to break up old foundation slabs. Frank carried it like it weighed nothing, like it was an extension of his arm, an instrument of justice. He walked straight to that beautiful helipad, that perfect circle of concrete we'd spent weeks perfecting, every inch level, every edge clean, the pride of our work. He stood at the edge for a moment, just looking at it. The sun was setting behind him, casting his shadow long across the white surface. Then he raised the sledgehammer. The first blow landed with a sound I'll hear until the day I die. Crack, like a bone snapping, like a heart breaking. The concrete splintered. A spiderweb of cracks spread from the impact point. "This was for you," Frank screamed at the sky. "At Washington, at Kennedy. I did this for you. Crack, I gave you everything. Crack, Hollywood, money, connections. Crack." His voice was raw, shredded, every word torn from somewhere deep. None of us moved. We stood there, me, the gardeners, the household staff, frozen, watching a man dismantle his own dream with his bare hands. The sledgehammer rose and fell, rose and fell. Frank's white shirt was soaked with sweat. His hands were bleeding, the wooden handle tearing his palms, but he didn't stop, couldn't stop. He was destroying more than concrete. He was destroying every illusion he'd ever had about power, about loyalty, about what friendship meant to men like Kennedy. Chunks of concrete flew through the air. What had been smooth and perfect was now jagged, broken, ruined. At some point, his butler tried to approach. "Mr. Sinatra, please." Frank spun around, sledgehammer raised, eyes wild. "Don't." We backed away. He kept swinging, even when his arms started to shake, even when each blow became weaker than the last. He swung until there was nothing left but rubble, until that symbol of his friendship with the president was just a pile of broken rock and dust. When the sledgehammer finally slipped from his hands, the sun had set completely. Frank stood there in the dark, chest heaving, looking at the destruction he'd wrought. I grabbed a bottle of water and approached carefully. "Mr. Sells." He didn't turn around, just kept staring at the ruins. "They used me, Eddie." His voice was hollow, spent. "I was a fundraiser, a connection to people they wanted access to, and when I became inconvenient," he laughed, a bitter, broken sound. "They went to Bing Crosby's house." He finally looked at me. Those famous blue eyes, old blue eyes, were empty. The light that had always burned there, that spark of ambition and hope and joy, it was gone. "Never trust powerful men, Eddie. They'll take everything you give them, and then they'll have dinner at your rival's house." That night changed Frank Sinatra forever. Something fundamental broke, and what grew back in its place was harder, colder, unforgiving. He never forgave the Kennedys, never. When Bobby Kennedy was assassinated in 1968, Frank didn't shed a single tear. People noticed, they whispered, but Frank didn't care. As far as he was concerned, Bobby Kennedy had been the architect of his humiliation. But Frank's revenge wasn't immediate. It wasn't hot-blooded. It was calculated, patient, the kind of revenge that only a man who's lived by his wits could execute. In 1970, Frank Sinatra did something unthinkable, something that shocked Hollywood and Washington alike. He publicly renounced the Democratic Party, the man who'd campaigned for Roosevelt, the man who'd sung at Kennedy's inauguration, the man who'd been the voice of liberal America for decades, switched sides. He became a Republican, and not just any Republican. He became Ronald Reagan's closest confidant. He performed at Reagan's inauguration. He advised him. He stood beside him. And every time Frank shook Reagan's hand, you could see it in his eyes. This was his revenge. This was him showing the Kennedys that he didn't need them, that he could be just as close to power without them. Some people called him a traitor, a sellout. They said he'd betrayed his working-class roots. But those people didn't know the whole story. They didn't know about the helipad, about the phone call, about watching a man pour his heart into something, only to have it thrown back in his face. Frank's political shift wasn't about ideology, it was personal. It was about a man who'd learned the hardest lesson of all. In the world of power, loyalty is a one-way street. Today, if you visit Frank's old estate in Palm Springs, you won't find that helipad. It was never rebuilt. Where it once stood, there's just desert sand, creosote bushes, the wind erasing history. But if you know where to look, if you dig down deep enough, you can still find pieces of that concrete, jagged chunks, buried beneath the surface, fragments of a broken promise. Evidence of a betrayal that shattered not just a friendship, but a man's faith in the American dream. Frank Sinatra sang My Way like it was a philosophy, a declaration of independence. But that song wasn't just about artistic freedom. It was about that night, about the sledgehammer, about refusing to be anyone's puppet ever again. He lived by his own code after that, trusted fewer people, loved more carefully, and never ever forgot what it felt like to be used. So I'm going to ask you something, and I want you to really think about it. If you'd given everything to a friend, your time, your money, your reputation, and they humiliated you in front of the world, would you have picked up that sledgehammer, or would you have walked away quietly? Because Frank Sinatra chose rage, he chose destruction, he chose to make noise, and in doing so, he taught us something about dignity, about self-respect, about refusing to be thrown away like yesterday's news. Leave your answer in the comments below. Tell me, was Frank right to destroy that helipad, or should he have let it go? And remember, sometimes legends aren't born on stage. Sometimes they're born in moments of pure righteous anger, with a sledgehammer in hand, and nothing left to lose.